shit.
Welcome to Trash Talk MMA.
Smile on my face, behind my back, and talk trash.
The #1 podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe by MMA aficionado Antoine Pelche.
Yo, and welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Pelche. Today on the show, I have a very special guest, UFC bantamweight fighter, the only fighter in the UFC out of Singapore, Mr. Royston Wee. How you doing, Royston?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. So you got a big fight coming up, brother.
Yeah, fighting May 16 in Manila. So,
have you fought in the Philippines before?
No, this is my first time.
So you're 4 fights into your MMA career. You had 2 fights before getting to the UFC, and you've had 2 successful decision wins in the UFC. How are you feeling about all this?
So far, it's been a great year for me last year. You know, having the UFC coming to Singapore as my debut was great, and I'm just looking forward to 2015, man. And I can't wait to showcase the world how much I've improved over this period of time.
When was your last fight? Was that back in
23rd August 2014, which was I was in Macau.
Yeah, you've had a pretty solid break.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you had such a long break between fights?
I was injured from the fight.
That's right. You had your nose broken.
I broke my nose. I got a big cut on my above my eye, and so I took some time to recover.
Okay.
And I started training just probably a month and a half after my surgeries and stuff, you know. So I was picking it up, and once I felt I was about 80-90% recovered, and that's why I started training normally again.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the broken nose thing because I had my nose broken multiple times when I was younger, and when I was working on the UFC video games, I was working with Joe Rogan, recording him in the studio, and he came in once, and his nose it looked like he'd had surgery. He had because he had a deviated septum.
Okay. And
he told me he worked with a fantastic surgeon. So I said, hey, give me this guy's address. I'm going to go check it out. So I went to see Rogan's, he's a, what do you call that, ear, nose, and throat doctor.
Yep, ENT.
And they looked inside my nose, and it was a disaster. The guy said, hey, I've spent my whole life fixing people's noses, and yours is one of the worst. So he's like, we can fix this, but normally a deviated septum would take about 2.5 hours of surgery, and I ended up being in surgery for 8 hours for a deviated septum. So did you have a deviated septum from your nose broken?
Yeah.
What was the state of your nose after the break?
From what I know, I had a clean break, I call it, or a clear fracture,
okay, and
a deviated septum. So my surgery wasn't a major surgery; it was a minor one. They call it septoplasty. So
yep, yeah.
So it took probably around, I guess, you can say 2 to 3 hours, and then I was hospitalized for probably 2 nights. 3 days, 2 nights, and then I'm back.
I didn't stay in the hospital. They sent me straight home. But I'm telling you, man, I was that recovery process. I mean, this is why I want to talk about this, because you see so many people get their noses absolutely mangled in fights, and there's some guys you get the impression they get their nose broken in every fight. I mean, Rich Franklin, he had his nose tooled twice gruesomely by Anderson Silva. Remember when Thiago Silva busted up Brandon Vera's nose? I mean, there's some horrifying things, and it's funny, as fans we look at that and we're like, oh, that's gross, and we forget about it, and we forget that these guys go home with their noses smashed flat.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just fix by itself. It's like, guys, that fixes all wrong. Your body doesn't know how to auto-correct that,
Yep.
And I had my nose broken just from being an idiot when I was a kid, and play fighting and stuff like that. I wouldn't get broken by a professional fighter. But I've always wanted to ask some guys who have seen that happen to us, like, hey, what did you do? Did you go get it fixed or not? Because I'm sure a lot of times guys don't get it fixed. And I know with me, I couldn't breathe out of my nose for pretty much my entire adult life. I had 100% blockage in my right nostril, and I had 80% blockage in my left. I now have full breathing capacity through my nose, I just get like a weird sort of drippiness out of it. I got to blow my nose all the time, but believe me, it's so much better. I can, because you can't sleep with your. Were you able to sleep with your mouth open?
Yeah.
No, you had to sleep with your mouth open.
Yeah.
And that's really, really bad. That's really bad for your esophagus. It's really bad for your vocal cords.
Yeah.
You want to always breathe through your nose when you sleep.
Yeah.
And of course, for me, doing exercise for years, it prevented me from exercising correctly. So how was the recovery of it? Because the recovery, people don't understand that the recovery process of a deviated septum is atrocious.
Yeah, like in the beginning right after the fight, when I broke my nose, I was thinking it shouldn't be much of a problem, I just gonna go for surgery and I should be able to recover in about a month time, but it's all these little things that you think it's minor, but it's really troublesome,
Oh yeah.
So,
well, the thing is that the tissues inside of your nose are the most sensitive blood vessels in the body, and so you always have to keep your heart rate down. Now, this doctor that I had, he was awesome. I swear, he was put on earth to do what he was doing. He was a god. First of all, when I went and consulted with him, I think he probably we did 3 sessions where he talked with me for about 3 hours each time, and he hand wrote every single word I said down. This guy documented my entire medical history. It was unbelievable. That the guy he was the incarnation of the perfect doctor. It was really, you could tell it was his calling in life to do what he was doing. And the care that he gave me was simply mind-blowing. And what's crazy is I was his last patient. He retired after. He was an older guy, probably late 60s, but just an incredible guy. He was like, you need to rent a lazy boy recliner. Okay. And he's like, and you need to sit at almost like dipped at a 45-degree angle so that the blood's flowing correctly through your body. He said, I don't want you doing anything that gets your heart rate up, and I don't want you, so no exercise, no running, nothing, and I don't want you, drinking any coffee, any stimulants. It was crazy. And he was like, and then I need you to buy a vapor machine, a humidifier.
Yeah.
And he's like, you need a humidifier, and you need that. And it was like, he gave me all these things, and I followed them to a T. And my recovery process went very well. I know a bunch of people who've had deviated septums, and since then they've had to go get them done again. Can you imagine having to go through again what you've done?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
You're probably gonna be like, dude, punch me, kick me anywhere, concuss me, knock me out cold, just don't break my friggin' nose, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad we have this to relate this with a pro fighter, because I know so many guys get their noses bashed in, and I'm like, do they even have the ability to get the surgery done between fights? I'm sure a lot of guys, they just, if they feel like they can function with the broken nose or the weight recovered, they still do it.
Yeah, some guys just neglect it,
Yep.
But it is important to breathe properly, and
5-round title fights.
Yeah, it's important, and who wants a broken nose? To have a broken nose to be able to sin physically, when everywhere they go, So it's important to fix it back.
Yeah.
And well, too bad if you break again. You got.
Is that the first time you broke your nose?
Yeah. And then you just gotta find the right doctor.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that when I was a kid and a teenager, I think I had my nose broken 3 times, and I never even went to a doctor once. I just went home.
Yeah.
I just went home, and then it eventually just stopped bleeding, and we just kept going.
Yeah.
And then ultimately at the end you realize that, hey, that's, all those injuries have compounded, and your nose is basically useless. It's like you just got a plug in your nostrils.
Yeah.
You just breathe into your mouth breather, a knuckle dragging mouth breather.
But it all depends on how severe it is. If because I did my own research, when I broke my nose and stuff, and if you broke your nose and you go to a doctor, if they feel that they can just fix it without operation, surgery,
yep.
That's pretty minor, but if your nose is pretty busted up, then get it fixed, Yeah.
Well, here's an interesting question too. So I was curious, how does the UFC deal with injuries? You had this fight in a UFC contest. Is this something that's covered by insurance by the UFC?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, awesome.
Any injuries we sustain from the fight itself, within a amount of time, we're gonna notify them, and they'll send us to one of the best doctors available wherever we are. So.
Okay, so you're in Singapore, so they just send you. They find a doctor for you here, and they send you to him.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So I'm pretty lucky that I'm a Singaporean. I'm in Singapore. So Singapore, to me,
good. Is it good healthcare here?
Yeah, we've one of the best medical in the world. So.
Yeah, I was actually researching that the other day because I'm Canadian and I'm French, and both countries are known for having, two of the best medical systems on the planet. And actually, I was looking at what is considered the best medical system in the world, and it is France, actually. But I believe that Singapore is pretty high up on the list as well.
One of the...
Probably in the top 10.
Yeah.
So did you have any other injuries? Because I think you were at the start of the conversation. You said that there was the nose and there was something else.
And a cut on my around my eyebrow. Yeah. So, but it's nothing much. Yeah.
Okay. So what's funny is you've had a pretty long break between your last fight, and I want to talk to you about before your first UFC fight, because essentially you had your first two fights a month apart at the end of 2011, and then you didn't fight for another 2 years. What was the reason behind that?
I had to fulfill my promise, of getting my degree. So right after my first two fights, I went to uni to study and get my degree, pursue my studies. So
and you have a degree, a double major in marketing and management, right?
Yeah. Okay. So right after, when I was about to graduate, I actually wanted to leave this industry and do something else.
Leave which industry? The marketing and management?
As in,
or the fighting?
Fighting.
Okay.
So I wanted to leave this MMA industry and then just move on to something else, something completely different. And at that point of time, I had a few opportunities. This is where Rebel FC came up.
Okay.
And they looked me up, and then they were asking about how about me fighting in their promotion around 2014. No, December 2013.
Okay.
They wanted me to fight at that time, and I was like, cool. Since there's an opportunity for me right now, why not? And then the Ultimate Fighter China tryouts came about, and they came to Singapore, MBS. So I was like,
check it out.
It's the UFC, man. So
talking to not.
Yeah. So I went down. I passed the first stage, and a few weeks later I got called, and they said that I got chosen as an alternative. So they want to fly me to China and then everything, and I stayed there alone for 22 days.
Oh, okay. So they did fly you out to...
Yeah, I was in Shenyang, so I was there alone.
Did you ever appear on the show? No.
Nah. Yeah, just in case, if someone's injured over there, and then I'll be fighting. But
okay.
But I was just alone, and then because of the exposure of the UFC people, they David Stern, he was asking me, so when I come back to Singapore, will I be fighting in any promotions or whatever? And I told him I'll be fighting in Rebel FC. So he was interested to put me in the January cut in Singapore.
Okay.
The UFC Singapore. So I was thinking okay, if
let's fast track things.
Yeah, I was telling him if I don't get injured in December for the Rebel FC right after the fight, I will fight January again in the UFC.
That's ambitious.
But he thought that it was a little bit risky because you wouldn't know, and the time frame is a little bit too short.
Is David Stern, is he the president of Rebel FC?
No. He's one of the scouting talent for UFC.
Gotcha.
So eventually, I was lucky because my manager, he's a lawyer as well. So he drafted a contract, which has gave me some advantage. So I was able to pull out of the contract with Rebel FC.
Okay.
And then eventually that's how I got into the UFC.
So when this is an interesting story, and I really want to get your perspective on this. When you got signed to the UFC and they announced this fight, there was some publications that wrote some articles about how perhaps controversial this was, because at the time you were a fighter with a 2-0 record.
Yep.
and you'd beaten 2 fighters with a combined record of 0-3. And for a lot of people, looking at the UFC, you know, it has the word in it. It's ultimate fighting. It's considered the pinnacle of the sport.
Yep.
And when people saw that you got signed, they were a little bit outraged because they were like, what's happened to that standard of being like that fighters really need to prove themselves, that they need to at least show potential, have proven certain qualities before qualifying to be in the promotion. As we all know, since the time you got signed, a ton of other people in similar situations have been signed, and things are much different in the last, because what was that, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago? You know, I mean, was it January last year? Yeah, January. So it's over a year ago. And you know, in recent months, you can't turn on the TV without a UFC being on, and they're in every country in the world, and a ton of them are flooded with rising fighters. What's your perspective on that? When did you read those articles? How did you feel about it when you saw these things being written about you? Know, I mean, because now you've proven people wrong. You have 2 victories in the UFC, so for sure, you with your 2 victories, you've proven you belong there. But what's your take on that? Should the UFC? Are you happy to see the way the UFC is expanding? Do you think it should allow fighters with a minimum amount of experience who perhaps show some talent, show some potential, but haven't proven it yet?
You gotta trust, you know, what the UFC is doing. You know, I mean, they've been in the business for many years, and the UFC don't just sign any fighters. You know, they did their background checks. You know, they have people around, word of mouth and everything, and they themselves will go down and to see whether it's true or not, whether is the fighter as good as what they heard, you know. So you gotta trust what the UFC have been doing, you know. And eventually,
they're not gonna sign people without doing their homework.
Yes, and like I said, UFC, they used to have an event every 2 months, a month and a half.
Oh, I mean, over the years, I mean, it's accelerated exponentially. But I mean, I'd say going back, you know, to kind of, I mean, since they've signed Pride, there's been a lot of events every year. But I think, I mean, roughly, you know, there was an event maybe every 6 weeks or so, maybe, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, and now it's like there's at least almost 2 a month.
Week.
And there's almost every week.
What the UFC is trying to do now is to expand globally. So if you want to have that same amount of fighters to fight every 2 weeks or so, they're gonna be burnt out. They're gonna be exhausted, you know. And if you tap into a different market, certain fighters just don't appeal to them.
Of course.
So,
but I mean, that was a point of the criticism. Is a lot of people were saying that, you know, that you were hired for the fight because it was in Singapore, and you were a representative of Singapore, and you're still the only representative of Singapore on that card, right? And I'm sure there's some validity to that, just based off of what we're saying. Of course, they're trying to tap into a new market. They have to have familiar faces on there. I think really what my question comes down to is it's like, have we reached a point now where the UFC has created more product, and to accommodate that product, they just simply need to bring in more people, and those people have to be based in some of the places that they're going to? I mean, I think the answer is yes, pretty much all across the board there. And to me, it's just a new era of the sport. I think also, over the course of the last 5-6 years, what's been incredible too is the amount of injuries that are occurring that are just decimating entire cards. Like, look what happened on that Montreal card. I mean, it was ridiculous. They couldn't keep a fight together. Look at what's happened to UFC 187, which 1 week ago was probably the greatest card put together by the UFC since UFC 100. And now we've lost John Jones versus Anthony Johnson. We've lost Khabib Nurmagomedov against Donald Cerrone. Who knows if we'll finally see Vitor Belfort against Chris Weidman, a fight that has been put together and fallen apart 4 times. You know, they are in a position where a ton of their stars are getting old, getting beat up. The BJ Penns, the Anderson Silvas, the Brock Lesnars, the George St. Pierres. I mean, they have to start getting people in there now. They have to start giving them exposure, and they have to start building stars. And they need to do it before those guys have already reached that level, which is how things used to be done 5-6 years ago.
That's right.
You know, like you said, it's pretty hard to criticize the UFC and ask them if they're doing things the right way. Because I don't care what anybody says, they're growing this sport.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that everybody's looking to grow the sport.
There's definitely risk, in what they're doing, but I believe what the UFC are doing are calculated risk, So for sure, people may question what the UFC are doing, but so far I think they've been doing well. So.
Now, are you a big fan of the sport?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you watch every event?
I try to. I don't watch every fight, but
it's pretty hard, actually.
For certain fighters, I'll definitely keep my eye on it.
Especially, it's hard to do it because so many fights are now international and they occur at different times of the day.
Yeah.
So, of course, the majority of events still occur prime time for people in North America.
Yeah.
But man, I just spent 3 months in Thailand, and you're basically waking up to watch a live UFC at 6 in the morning, with the main card coming on at around 9. So it's a weird thing to go from having your buddies over for beers and barbecue and throwing on the fights and getting rowdy on a Saturday night, then waking up hungover or whatever and having to watch a fight with eggs and coffee at 9 in the morning. It's been a weird switch up for me on that level, because I was always West Coast, so you'd get to watch the fights. The prelims would start at 4. The main card would start at 7. It was great. You could even just watch the whole card. It'd be done at 10, and you could still go out with your buddies or whatever. You still actually had the rest of the evening.
That's right.
So let's talk about the MMA scene in general in Singapore, and more particularly about the gym that you train out of and coach at, Impact MMA. So when did MMA start popping off in Singapore?
I would say about 3-4 years back. That's where MMA starts getting more popular in Singapore.
Crazy. That's just not a long time.
3-4 years back. I'm doing this. I've been doing this for about close to 8 years, and the first 4 years, people know about MMA, but it's only a small fraction of them, and most of the time when people ask me, or relatives, ask me, so what are you doing and stuff, I say, I train a little bit of MMA and everything, and people will always ask you, what's MMA, If you say it's BJJ, it'll be, what's
what are
that?
all these acronyms?
Yeah. They only know Muay Thai, boxing, and if you tell them you do wrestling, they'll be asking you whether you're doing WWE or WWF at that point of time, So, but ever since regionally, you have like ONE FC, Rebel FC, to promote MMA in Singapore. More and more people are more aware of it.
Because if you say 4 years, that really coincides with ONE FC that started in 2011.
That is right.
So that must have just been a boon for you guys, of being like, finally, there's somebody, that a huge promotion that's building itself right in our backyard.
But over these years, it's been a steady increase of people who are aware about MMA. But the education of the sport in Singapore is still very low. And a lot of people in Singapore still do not understand what MMA is about, To them, they just want to go there and watch brawls, that's all. They don't understand the technique that the fighters are doing. So
I've had this talk, I've been talking with so many people in Thailand, and there's a lot of buzz around about Thailand being that, as martial arts, as Muay Thai is such an integral part of their culture. If the kids growing up there could be educated into MMA now, because they started doing Muay Thai at 3-4 years old. And there's a lot of enthusiasm about, wait a second, if we can educate the Thais about the validity of MMA and how it can be probably a much bigger financial alternative to a lot of the kids growing up there than all just being Muay Thai fighters that really don't get paid much and are fighting 3 times a month and are just, physically decrepit by the age 20, 22, 23, who've had 300 fights when they're 15 years old. Those are crazy numbers, right? For people that are purely in MMA, or if even just fans of MMA, where they're like, you see these guys fight once, twice a year, sometimes, not even once a year. You're like, how can these guys put themselves through this? So they're not making money. They're probably getting physically brutalized for way too young of an age. If they could learn it and they could apply this from their youngest age, I think you'd be seeing some killers in there.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you actually. But again, how long will it take? Because
it's a larger cultural and educational process than an actual training process. It's like they need to come on board with it, and Muay Thai is just so rooted into their culture that it's like going to France or Europe and telling them, hey guys, stop playing soccer and start playing American football. They're just that's a deconstruction of their education at a DNA level.
Because Muay Thai has always been part of their culture in Thailand, and yes, they are doing it for money, but like we said, it's part of their culture. They grew up learning, understanding about it, and I guess for the Thais, to them MMA is just a money-making tool, but it's not rooted into their culture. So that's why you can see a lot of Thais are now starting to fight MMA, but they're still pretty, Muay Thai style. You can see the Thai style, and they are
it's not
really,
the same investment.
Yeah, they're not really open about grappling, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. They just do it for the sake of doing it.
Well, no, I think there's also the part where the martial art, do they even view it as a martial art?
Yeah.
I think there's probably a blockage at that level too. They're used to fighting in a ring, they're used to fighting in a certain environment. All of a sudden there's a cage, there's little gloves, there's everything's different. Everything's different. Except that you can do all the stuff you do in Muay Thai, and then there's so much more.
That is right.
So what about your gym, Impact MMA?
My gym.
There's a lot. There's a lot of options to train MMA in Singapore.
Yep.
Why are you at Impact MMA?
My gym, I've got one of the pioneers in Singapore, and a few of them are just the best you can ever find in Singapore. My head coach, he's been around in the martial arts business for 20 over years. Yeah, he's been doing a lot of different martial arts, and my wrestling coach, he used to represent Singapore for SEA Games for wrestling, and he's a black belt in judo as well, and a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. And definitely I got my black belt coach all the way from Brazil, Chad Matt. He's one of the best. If you see him roll, it's like dancing. Yeah, so I've got a great team and of coaches, and other than them, I have a great team of guys to train with. From striking to grappling, wrestling. Sometimes I got guys coming from other gyms or other wrestling federations in Singapore to come down and wrestle with us.
Yeah, looking at the trainers at Impact MMA, I was surprised to see how many of them are all active fighters as well.
Yep.
And a lot of them are active MMA fighters.
Yep.
A lot of 1FC guys.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that is right.
Do you think that's really important to train not only with people who give good instruction but are still practicing the craft professionally like that?
Definitely.
What do you think that brings?
To me, for coaches especially, I put more of my trust in a coach who teaches and train at the same time. I don't really believe in coaches who are, just out of shape.
It's the whole practice what you preach thing, right? It's like, I think if somebody, for example, goes into a gym and they see somebody, ripped with, a six-pack of abs and they look the part, you're going to be like, this person knows what they're doing and they can train me, right? And I'm sure that also applies to MMA where you're like, but that being said, of course, there's some people that don't necessarily look the part and know very well what they're doing.
Yeah, but you're right. It doesn't mean where if this guy, this coach, he looks ripped, he looks in shape, he's able to teach. Maybe he can't fight well. He's just able to analyze properly. But I prefer a coach who's able to analyze and able to put it to practice themselves.
Yep.
And I trust a coach more like this than a coach who doesn't train and all you do is just tell them what to do and analyze, because there's only certain things.
Yep.
A limit to where they can teach, you know. So for me, I'm grateful because the coaches that I have, they train, they teach, and they are good at analyzing my strengths and weaknesses as well as my opponent's strengths and weaknesses. So
Yep.
yeah.
Now, another interesting thing I've read about you is that you employ a sports psychologist. Mm-hmm. Do you still do that?
I employed a sports psychologist for my first 2 fights, you know, because
Before going into them.
yeah, before going into them. And
So what prompted that?
well, my first 2 fights were a small scale fight, you know, and I still remember back at 2011, how I feel before the fight, stepping into the cage. That kind of feeling it's really hard to explain, you know, to people who haven't fought before. But that adrenaline rush, you know,
The anxiety,
anxiety,
yep.
and how nervous you are and everything, and it plays a part. It even though I finished my first 2 fights fast, but I was really gassed out. It wasn't because I didn't train hard enough physically, but I didn't.
Oh, it's the mind taking over the body.
Yeah, train hard enough mentally.
Yep.
So I remember how it felt. Even though I finished the fight in like a minute plus, that I felt really tired. You know, so I knew this is where I had to hire a psychologist to work on my mental game. And,
You know, it's such a. It must be such a daunting event in life to do what you guys do. You know, some people, they get panic, they feel anxiety and panic when they go for a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there can be a ton of things like that, you know, or if somebody goes out on a date or something like that, you know what I mean? And like what we're talking with you guys is, you know, you are locking yourself in a steel cage with 4-ounce gloves and standing across from somebody whose job is to finish you as quickly and violently as possible to get a bonus and make a bunch of money.
Yep.
To get fans to sit in the seats when they're on the poster. It's yeah, wow. I mean, I can't begin to imagine the feelings that some people might go through.
Yeah.
Now, what seems interesting is that you took that initiative in your 2 first fights, and it seems like your composure and the feelings that you've had emotionally going into your UFC fights, which normally are the ones where everybody gets the infamous UFC jitters.
Yep.
You know, bright lights, the panic, and they fail to perform when they get into the UFC. That hasn't been the case for you. How did you feel going into your 2 UFC fights so far?
So far it's been great. You know, I was really glad I hired my sports psychologist, and he's one of the best in Singapore. He trained the national athletes, you know. So he taught me a bunch of techniques to learn how to calm myself down and visualize, you know. And I learned a lot about life just like this. And when I stepped out, everything was just calm. And how should I say, calm and collected, you know.
Yep.
I'm still alert, I'm still relaxed and calm, and able to see whatever's coming at me, you know, which was exactly opposite for my first 2 fights. Yeah.
And it's funny because looking at your first 2 fights, like you said, you were anxious, you were nervous, and yet you finished them quickly, and you finished them by submission.
Yep.
Then your 2 UFC fights, you go in calm and collected, and you finish them by some ground game, by decision. Mm-hmm. But by trade, you're a striker. Mm-hmm. You're a Muay Thai and a striking coach at Impact MMA. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yep.
So how do you reconcile all this? Because it's like this is what you train people. This is what you're probably best at, between quotes. I mean, obviously you're proven that you're a well-rounded fighter, that you have the gas tank to go 15 minutes, that you can win by submission. But you teach striking. How are you putting this puzzle together in your head?
I used to love doing a lot of Muay Thai and stuff, you know. But what a lot of people out there don't know is I just love wrestling. I love grappling, you know. I love to control guys from the top. But a lot of people who don't know me or never watch me train at all would have the perception of me being just as a pure striker.
Okay.
So all I have to say is come down and watch me train, and that's what a lot of people have been talking about when I did my debut in Singapore. They were saying, he can't do this, what I see in the UFC and everything, and I just proved them wrong. So yeah.
Do you feel you've showcased your striking to the degree that you can do it so far in your UFC career?
You will see it on May 16th.
All right, then let's seg into that. So your next fight's on May 16th at UFC Fight Night 66 in Manila.
Yep.
Against Guan Yu Ning. Is that how I
Ning
pronounce
Guang
it?
Yu. Yeah.
Ning Guan Yu.
Yeah, Ning
Pardon
Guan
me. Dumb Westerner. What do you know about Ning? Or what I say, what do you know about Guan Yu? What's the grammatically? What's the right way for me to say that?
Ning is his surname, so
okay.
Guang, yeah.
I guess you could say either one because I can
either
say,
one. Yeah.
What are you gonna say? Yeah, okay.
But
he's 4-2-1. He's got 2 knockouts, a submission, and a decision win. Mm-hmm. And is this fight at featherweight or bantamweight?
Bantamweight.
I was looking online, and Sherdog gets marked as a featherweight fight.
They released it.
I think the UFC is even indicating on their website that it's featherweight. But it is a bantamweight fight, so he's dropping down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've watched some of his fights actually from the Ultimate Fighter China during that time, and he fought in the same card as me in Macau.
Yep.
Which was 23rd of August. So I saw that fight, and he's a Greco-Roman wrestler. This is what I know. He started off as a wrestler. He's got for stand-up, he's got a left hand. His kicks are so, just all right.
Yep.
And basically that's it. So that's pretty much what he has, based on what I watched. Yeah.
So without divulging your game plan, how do you see this fight going down?
It's gonna be a typical orthodox versus southpaw guy. So
are you orthodox?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're gonna see a lot more weapons this time. Like I said, over the period when I was recovering, I was actually picking up a lot of different techniques, a lot of different skills, and putting them in for sparring. And now I have just more tools to play with it for this fight. So
I think that's one of the interesting things too, when people get those extensive amounts of times between fights, and sometimes you see guys come out and they just put on these mind-boggling improved performances. Like for example, when, speaking of your division, when TJ Dillashaw fought Renan Barão, everybody was like, why is this guy in a title fight? And then he just put on an absolute clinic, and it was one of the most brilliant performances in the history of the sport, frankly. I mean, I don't think that's over-exaggerating. I think everybody was just, I kind of got goosebumps just thinking about that fight, man. It was just, you were like, wait a second, where'd this guy, who's this TJ Dillashaw dude? And I mean, he'd put in his wins, he'd put in his fights, but that astronomical leap in improvement, it's rare that you see that.
Yep.
But I mean, to me, that was an incredible example of that. Who am I thinking to? Who else? What are some other good examples of that, when guys have just come back and just shown a complete other side of them?
I thought Chad Mendes was doing really good against
Mendes,
Jose
for
Aldo.
sure.
Yeah. So.
When he, especially after that loss, his first loss to Aldo, he came back with all sorts of new tools in the
different
box.
fighter.
A totally different fighter.
Yeah. So.
What a great fighter. Well, what a great camp. Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's a camp that you keep a close eye on, because those are a lot of guys that you could potentially be facing, right?
Yeah, I actually did plan to fly over and train with them. So
I think that'd be amazing. Well, I mean, let's talk about that. You have your entire career, have you just trained in Singapore?
Yes.
So do you plan on expanding that? I mean, you just mentioned that you had
I was
that
actually planning to fly overseas to train, and at that point of time I didn't had any fights coming out, but UFC called me up and wanted me to fight. That's why I had to push my plans a little bit further. So definitely after this fight, I'm planning to go to California to train with the Team Alpha Male guys. So yeah.
Are you already in? Do you have a relationship with those guys yet? Or?
Not yet, but I mean, I'll see Uriah Faber in Manila anyway. So if things work out, you know.
And it's an interesting dynamic. Yeah, that's right, because he's going to be in the main event with. That's going to be a heck of a fight.
Yeah.
Who do you have in that one? Main event of Uriah Faber versus Frankie Edgar.
It's hard to say, man, but
it's a great fight.
I've been a Uriah Faber fan, so
how can you not be, right? Yeah. Has any guy shown more durability? He's never lost a non-title fight.
Yep.
That's what makes this thing interesting, is because Frankie could be getting a title fight without taking this fight. He's taking a non-title fight against the Uriah who's coming up from bantamweight.
Yep.
It's I think right now, if I had to put money down, I'd put it on Edgar.
Edgar?
I mean, he just looked insanely good against Cub. Defeating Cub Swanson in the 5th round in his last fight. And Cub Swanson was just on a tear. And now Cub came back and he lost to Max Holloway the other day.
Yeah.
Late, and I mean, he couldn't find his groove in that fight. And Cub's no joke, man.
Well, you know? I think a lot of people look past Max Holloway. And a lot of people were actually asking me,
he's a nice addition
before the fight, who will win, Cub or Max Holloway?
It was my only pick wrong.
A lot of people told me Cub Swanson's gonna win, and I told them I think Max Holloway is gonna win, because if you look at his fights, he is always improving.
Yeah, he's very dynamic. He's got a lot of different tools, and he's got a certain physicality that he's bringing to that division. That's that it's the same thing. It's kind of that physicality, that height, and that reach that Connor's bringing to it as well. But yeah, he's tall and rangy for that, and it was interesting to see him fight Cole Miller before too, because Cole Miller presents those same problems to guys in that division. Have you ever fought a really tall guy like him?
No. Actually, yes. My first UFC fight, Dave Galera. He was about close to 1.8. Yeah,
because I looked at the
close to 1.8.
Today I watched the weigh-ins of that before, just to see how you guys compared. Yeah, he was tall.
Yeah, it's pretty tall and lengthy.
Yeah. Crazy. Well, shit, dude, this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you have any shout outs or sponsors you wanna hit up?
I just want to thank everyone from Impact MMA. So far, my teammates, my coaches, all of them have been really supportive and helping me for all my fight camps. And shout out to Under Armour. They've been always providing me all the gears I need. And if you guys are in town, head to Burger Wings and Bar in Orchard. They got good burgers over there.
I've had 2 burgers since I'm here, dude. I got. Where's the best mee goreng in town? I'm a mee goreng fiend. I love mee goreng. Where can I find it?
You can try one at Clark Key, at Boat Key.
Okay.
Yeah,
oh, that's good, because I'm actually going to. I'm changing hotels tomorrow, and I'll be going to Boat Key.
Fight G, right? Yeah, because I used to be from Fight G. So
why did you go from Fight G to Impact? What was the transition there?
Back then, I wanted to leave and to do just pure wrestling with the national wrestlers at that point of time. And my current head coach, he was an assistant coach in Fight G.
Okay.
So he left, and he heard about me. I told him that I wanted to leave for a while and just do wrestling, and he just asked me, am I interested to come to Impact and help him teach and probably fight as well. So that's how I transitioned from Fight G to Impact. Yeah. So. And that's why I know that they got pretty good mee goreng over there.
Well, I'll need you to give me the address, because I'm going to be down there tomorrow, so it's perfect timing. Excellent. All right, man. Well, how can people keep in touch with you on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter, Royston15.
Okay.
Or you can follow my page, Royston Wee, on Facebook.
Okay.
Yep.
No Instagram?
I have Instagram as well. It's also Royston15. So
what's the 15 about?
15 is just the date of my birthday.
Okay.
So I'm born like November.
Oh, you're 15
15.
November, because I'm the 19th. I remember seeing that today too.
Yeah, so
I'm just like 10 years older than you or something like that. But we won't go there. Awesome. Royston, this was great talking with you, man. Thanks for coming on the show. I
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
Your time.
Thank
and
you.
Hey,
thank you.
best of luck on your fight on May 16th. We'll be tuning in there to see what. Do you know where you fit on the card?
Probably if I'm not wrong, the fourth fight, the fourth bout.
Okay, so you're on the prelims.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll get a big win, and you'll see the next time you'll be on the main card.
Hopefully, yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. This was the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host Antoine Pelletier with my special guest, UFC bantamweight Royston Wee, fighting out of Singapore. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. We're out of here. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. Be sure to visit trashtalkmma.com.
Smile on my face, behind my back, and talk trash.
And don't forget to follow Antoine on Twitter at Trash Talk MMA. Let us know you're listening. Use hashtag Trash Talk MMA.
Tooled twice gruesomely by Anderson Silva. Remember when Thiago Silva busted up Brandon Vera's nose? I mean, there's some horrifying things, and it's funny, as fans we look at that and we're like, oh, that's gross, and we forget about it. And we forget that these guys go home with their noses smashed flat.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just fix by itself. It's like,
Yep.
guys, that fixes all wrong. Your body doesn't know how to auto-correct that, you know?
Yep.
And I had my nose broken just from being an idiot when I was a kid and, play fighting and stuff like that. I wouldn't get broken by a professional fighter. But I've always wanted to ask some guys who I've seen that happen to, it's like, hey, what did you do? Did you go get it fixed or not? Because I'm sure a lot of times guys don't get it fixed. And I know with me, I couldn't breathe out of my nose for pretty much my entire adult life. I had 100% blockage in my right nostril, and I had 80% blockage in my left. I now have full breathing capacity through my nose. I just get like a weird sort of drippiness out of it. I got to blow my nose all the time, but believe me, it's so much better. I can, because you can't sleep with your. Were you able to sleep with your mouth open?
Yeah.
No, you had to sleep with your mouth open.
Yeah.
And that's really, really bad. That's really bad for your esophagus. It's really bad for your vocal cords.
Yeah.
You want to always breathe through your nose when you sleep.
Yeah.
And of course, for me, doing exercise for years, it prevented me from exercising correctly. So how was the recovery of it? Because the recovery.
Welcome to Trash Talk MMA,
Smile on my face, behind my back, and talk trash.
the #1 podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe by MMA aficionado Antoine Pelletier.
Yo, and welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Pelletier. Today on the show, I have a very special guest, UFC bantamweight fighter, the only fighter in the UFC out of Singapore, Mr. Royston Wee. How you doing, Royston?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. So you got a big fight coming up, brother.
Yeah, fighting May 16 in Manila. So,
Have you fought in the Philippines before?
no, this is my first time.
So you're 4 fights into your MMA career. You had 2 fights before getting to the UFC, and you've had 2 successful decision wins in the UFC. How you feeling about all this?
So far, it's been a great year for me last year. Having the UFC coming to Singapore as my debut was great, and I'm just looking forward to 2015, man. And I can't wait to showcase the world how much I've improved over this period of time.
When was your last fight? Was that back in?
23rd August 2014, which was I was in Macau.
Yeah, you've had a pretty solid break.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you had such a long break between fights?
I was injured from the fight.
That's right. You had your nose broken.
I broke my nose. I got a big cut on my above my eye, and so I took some time to recover.
Okay.
And I started training just probably a month and a half after my surgeries and stuff, So I was picking it up, and once I felt I was about 80-90% recovered, and that's why I started training normally again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the broken nose thing because I had my nose broken multiple times when I was younger, and when I was working on the UFC video games, I was working with Joe Rogan, recording him in the studio, and he came in once, and his nose it looked like he'd had surgery. He had because he had a deviated septum.
Okay. And
he told me he worked with a fantastic surgeon, so. I said, hey, give me this guy's address. I'm going to go check it out. So I went to see Rogan's, what do you call it, ear, nose, and throat doctor.
Yep, ENT.
And they looked inside my nose, and it was a disaster. The guy said, hey, I've spent my whole life fixing people's noses, and yours is one of the worst. So he's like, we can fix this, but normally a deviated septum would take about 2.5 hours in surgery, and I ended up being in surgery for 8 hours for a deviated septum. So did you have a deviated septum from your nose broke?
Yeah.
What was the state of your nose after the break?
From what I know, I had a clean break, I call it, or a clear fracture.
Okay.
And a deviated septum. So my surgery wasn't a major surgery; it was a minor one. They call it septoplasty. So
yep.
Yeah. So it took probably around, I guess. You can say 2 to 3 hours, and then I was hospitalized for probably 2 nights. Yeah, 3 days, 2 nights, and then I'm back.
I didn't stay in the hospital. They sent me straight home. But I'm telling you, man, I was that recovery process. I mean, this is why I want to talk about this, because you see so many people get their noses absolutely mangled in fights. And there's some guys you get the impression they get their nose broken in every fight. I mean, Rich Franklin, he had his nose recovery. People don't understand that the recovery process of a deviated septum is atrocious.
Yeah, like in the beginning right after the fight, when I broke my nose, I was thinking it shouldn't be much of a problem. I just gonna go for surgery and I should be able to recover in about a month time, but it's all these little things that you think it's minor, but it's really troublesome,
Oh yeah.
So
well, the thing is that the tissues inside of your nose are the most sensitive blood vessels in the body.
Yes.
And so you always have to keep your heart rate down.
Yeah.
This doctor that I had, he was awesome. I swear he was put on earth to do what he was doing. He was a god. First of all, when I went and consulted with him, I think he probably we did 3 sessions where he talked with me for about 3 hours each time. And he hand wrote every single word I said down. This guy documented my entire medical history. It was unbelievable. That the guy he was the incarnation of the perfect doctor. It was really, you could tell it was his calling in life to do what he was doing. And the care that he gave me was simply mind-blowing. And what's crazy is I was his last patient. He retired after. He was an older guy, probably late 60s, but just an incredible guy. He was like, you need to rent a lazy boy recliner. Okay. And he's like, and you need to sit at almost like dipped at a 45-degree angle.